Welcome to another episode of Azure Mythbusters. Today we're going to be looking at the myth that there's no MBaaS for mobile developers. So what even is MBaaS, you may be wondering? Well, MBaaS is a mobile backend as a service. So it's all of the cloud services that we may need to power our mobile applications. Historically, you may have used something like PaaS.com or Firebase. Well, Microsoft has an MBaaS available to you to use today. And it's called Visual Studio App Center. So it's our one-stop shop for building all of the services that are going to help you build a 5-star mobile app. And today we're going to be having a look at it in the context of Swift development. So let's have a quick look at some of the features that we have available to us in Visual Studio App Center. It covers a gamut of different things that we're going to need to do as mobile developers. So we're going to need to build our applications, test our applications, distribute it out to our users, diagnose problems that occur out in the field, analyze what's actually happening within our application, and also provide functionality like user authentication or storing data. So if you're developing applications, you need to build your app somewhere. Now we have build solutions within Visual Studio App Center, so this can build your app for iOS, for tvOS, for macOS. We've got you covered on the Apple platforms using either Objective-C or Swift. This integrates in with your source repository, so it doesn't matter where you're storing your code, we're probably going to be able to integrate with it, and that's going to fire off these builds automatically. So I check in my code into GitHub, Visual Studio App Center grabs a copy of that code and starts building it, and notifies me straight away if there's any issues, which is pretty great. Once I've built the application, I need to test it, and we have a testing solution. So actually our testing solution is a warehouse in Denmark with thousands and thousands of physical devices as they come from the manufacturer, just like this, on a shelf with an iPhone cable or USB-C cable plugged in the bottom. And these are available for you to upload your apps to test. So what we do is we launch our application on all of these devices and we start to simulate button presses and swipes and sliding around and check that your application doesn't crash. Now you can pick which devices that your app runs on. So it might be that you only care about iPads, or you might only care about iPhones. Or if you're building an Android app, for example, there may be a particular Android manufacturer that is most interesting to you. So maybe you don't need to test on loads of different devices, but you're still wanting to use Visual Studio App Center. Well, as part of that build process, with just a tick box for free, we will launch your app at least once on a physical device in our warehouse in Denmark to just test that your application runs and doesn't crash on startup. As I say, it's just a tick box, you don't have to pay a penny for it, and it gives you a little bit of safety in that that app is actually going to work on a physical device. So we can diagnose our applications as well, so when crashes occur out in the wild, we don't write perfect code all of the time, we need to be able to understand why did that crash occur? And with just one line of code with Visual Studio App Center, we can get that crash report directly to us within the portal. And it will tell us the exact line of code that the app crashed on. So I, as a developer, can load up Xcode, find that line of code within my class, put a breakpoint in there and try and reproduce the situation that led to that crash. Now I also want to discover how are my users using the applications that I ship. And so this is where analytics comes in. So I can track what the users are doing within the application. Now I can track custom events, so I can say if there's something important to me within my application that I want to understand if users are getting to that screen, for example, I can add that to the portal. And anytime the user taps on something, I get a notification within the App Center portal. I can also view the data in real time. So as users are tapping away in the application, I can see the stream of information coming in. And that allows me insights into whether that new feature is popular, can people discover these new features, or maybe I can get rid of some screens that are no longer being used by users. So these are all in production today. You can go onto App Center and grab them, but we have some preview features that make App Center even more useful for mobile developers. And these include authentication. So as a mobile developer, I often need to identify who is using my application so that I can create content bespoke for that particular individual. And to do that, I can use Active Directory B2C, which is business to consumer. So this integrates into your app with just one line of code. It's super simple to get started with. And it gives you 50,000 free authentications without having to pay a penny, and that's every single month. So it's a pretty great way to get started with authentication. And that couple of lines of code to get you started, look, Super simple. There's no reason why you shouldn't be adding auth to your app. And this is going to unlock the ability to authenticate with a huge variety of authentication providers such as Amazon, Microsoft, you can use Google, Twitter, LinkedIn. And we even have a blog post that shows how to use a new Apple sign-in. So you can continue to use your native authentication options on your iPhone devices. So that's authentication, a really, really important piece of the puzzle for building secure mobile applications with user data. But that data is really important as well. So we've built a data solution that's built on top of Azure Cosmos DB. So this enables global scale storage of your app data and your user data in a single collection using NoSQL. So this is a NoSQL database running distributed across the globe. And it's super easy to consume. Just like the authentication, we've got a really nice SDK that brings it down to just a couple of lines of code to get started. So when we talk about global distribution, this is a really tricky problem to solve individually as a developer, but through leveraging tools like Cosmos DB, it becomes just as simple as a couple of clicks. So I can come into the portal here, and if I discover that I've got loads of users down in Australia, well, I can just tick on the plus. And that's going to copy all of my data from up here, which is running in West Europe, down to that Australian data center. And then any users in Australia that open up my app will be connected to that instance of the data. So they don't have to traverse the entire length of the globe. And if I need to deploy to America, I can just start ticking over there and hit save. So it's super, super easy to just scale out my data without having to worry about copying everything over and keeping it in sync and patching databases and none of that. It's just handled for me. Just a couple of ticks. And in terms of the data, there's two types of data to think about within Visual Studio App Center. So there's read-only data, which is what we call app data. So this means that the users can pull that data as much as they want from Visual Studio App Center, but they're never going to be allowed to write anything to that. If you want to write data, then you use user data. And as part of the saving, it brings along the user ID. So that information is unique to a particular individual. So this is quite important because if you write to the app data, or you try and write to the app data, your app is going to crash. So that's just a useful hint to get you started. If you're writing, make sure it's user data. And this is in fact how we write some user data using the App Center Swift SDK. Just a couple of lines. We start with msdata.create. It's pretty self-explanatory. And if you're comfortable with Swift development, this should be really, really easy to get started with. In fact, let's have a look at the code to list some of our data. Again, just a small snippet of code can unlock this extremely powerful functionality within your mobile applications. So let me show you a little demo app that I've built, which uses App Center SDKs, as well as some REST APIs from Azure in general. So here I have an iPhone simulator running on my Mac, and this is the app built entirely with Swift 4, and it integrates with the CocoaPods and Visual Studio App Center. So all of the data that you just saw is coming from a Cosmos DB instance that's running actually in Amsterdam right now. And I can search this data. So if I come up and I'll search for blob storage, for example, and I can see I get nice hit highlighting. So it's making the blob slightly larger, it's slightly bolder. And that's just using standard Swift APIs connected to the REST API from Azure Search. I send out a HTTP response, I get that back, I parse it and I display it within the list. Super simple given our REST API documentation is so full and complete. And then these, I just click, it's loading up the data, that's pulling it in from Cosmos. And this is 100% native, it's super, super speedy. I get offline sync with this, so anything that I save into the cloud, the next time my app connects to it, it's going to store a copy of that locally. I can obviously change settings, so I've got deep integrations with the OS with things like anytime I hit an article, I'm saving that into the Spotlight so that I can search for it offline. So this is a really nice way to build your mobile applications, a kind of mixture between REST APIs using CocoaPods and then the functionality that's available to you through the system APIs to create this rich user experience for your end users. So that's the mobile app. This is available on GitHub to download, totally open source. And this is the actual App Center portal. So I'll just run through this very quickly. Just like those slides you saw earlier, we have the build, we have test, we have distribute, where we can choose who we're distributing to, and we have diagnostics, so I can come in and see when have my app crashed. Look at that, we've got a couple of errors, but nothing too serious, thank goodness. I can have a look at my analytics. which is showing me more information because obviously I'm using the application. It's just me and my partner using it at the moment, so not a huge amount of users. But you can see we're regularly actually starting the app and using it. And then if we move into authentication, it's kind of placeholder for the moment, but this is because it's in preview. This is going to look a little better in the future. And then if we come down to push, this is the exciting one, I think. We can send out push notifications. So I can send a push notification out to all of my registered users, or I can send out a push notification to a small subset of users. So let's call this test notification. Spelling isn't too important. We'll call it testing. 1, 2, 3. We'll hit next. We can see I get to pick who I'm going to send it to. So let's create an audience. And we'll say we're sending it just to people that speak English because it's an English message. So we'll select that. We'll send that notification. And all of my users are now getting notified that there's a new blog post. So this is a really great way to notify your users and increase user engagement. So think of Visual Studio App Center as your one-stop shop for mobile development. You create your project, just a couple of lines of code, integrate it into your entire solution, and then you've got everything you need to build, test, distribute, and run your cloud-enabled mobile applications using Azure.